Winter in the northern village was merciless. The frost gripped everything around, turning every breath into a cloud of vapor. Mike, an ordinary local, was used to these conditions. Every morning, he stepped out of his old house, put on heavy boots and a woolen hat, and headed to the lake to fish. That morning was no different, but a feeling of unease lingered. The forest, usually alive with the sounds of birds and the distant cracking of trees, stood eerily silent. When Mike reached the lake, he stopped at the edge. He listened carefully, and then heard a strange, faint sound. It wasn't the wind, nor the crackling of ice. The sound was more like a low moan, or a growl. Mike strained his ears, and then he noticed it. About 100 yards from the shore, in the middle of the frozen lake, something was moving. As he walked closer, he saw it. A massive bear, half submerged in the icy water, frantically thrashing its paws against the edge of the ice. The bear was drowning. The ice around it had already started to crack, and with each passing second, the animal sank deeper. Mike froze in place, his heart pounded in his chest. Thoughts raced through his mind. What do I do? Run? Help? What if it attacks? But he realized one thing. If he did nothing, the bear would die. Mike took a deep breath, looked up at the sky as if asking for strength, and resolutely stepped forward. Every step across the ice was treacherous. The ice creaked under his boots, and the cold pierced through to his bones. But Mike kept moving, his eyes fixed on the bear. As he got closer, he saw the terror in the animal's eyes. That gaze was so human-like that it made Mike's heart ache. "Hang on, buddy," he whispered, as if the bear could understand him. And then the ice beneath his feet let out a sharp crack. The ice beneath Mike's feet creaked louder with every step. He knew that every move brought him closer to the same fate as the bear. "Just a little further," he muttered under his breath, gripping the rope he had grabbed from his fishing gear. The bear kept thrashing in the water, desperately trying to climb out. But its movements were growing weaker. Its paws barely rose above the surface anymore. The animal was running out of strength. Mike knew there wasn't much time left. He dropped to his knees to spread his weight and cautiously crawled closer. Every inch felt like an eternity. The freezing air burned his lungs. The cold gnawed through his jacket like tiny needles. When he was just a few feet away, the ice beneath him suddenly cracked. The sound was deafening. Instinctively, Mike leaned back, redistributing his weight. The ice held, but he knew there wouldn't be a second chance. "Come on, just hold on," he murmured, sliding closer to the bear. Finally, he was close enough. Mike uncoiled the rope, fashioned a loop, and tossed it toward the bear. The first throw missed. The loop fell just short of the bear's paw. The bear let out a weak, pitiful sound. Mike tried again, his hands trembling from the cold. This time, the loop caught the bear's front paw. "Got it," Mike whispered, his heart pounding. He pulled on the rope carefully, avoiding sudden movements. The bear, seemingly understanding the effort, weakly tried to help. Mike summoned every ounce of strength he had, ignoring the burning pain in his freezing fingers. Each tug on the rope was a battle. The ice beneath him creaked ominously, and each time it did, he froze, holding his breath. But slowly, inch by inch, the bear began to emerge from the icy water. "Almost there. Come on," Mike muttered, straining with everything he had. The bear managed to get its front paws onto the edge of the ice. Mike gave one final pull, his muscles screaming in protest. But then, disaster struck. The ice at the edge gave way under the bear's massive weight, sending it plunging back into the freezing water. "No," Mike shouted, his voice echoing across the frozen lake. The icy wind whipped at his face, but he refused to give up. Teeth chattering, hands shaking, he tightened his grip on the rope and pulled again, harder this time. The bear, gathering its last reserves of strength, made one final push. It heaved itself out of the water, its powerful paws scraping against the ice, and collapsed on the frozen surface. For a moment, neither moved. Mike lay motionless on the ice, gasping for breath, his body trembling from the cold and exhaustion. The bear, too, lay still, its heaving chest the only sign of life. Mike slowly pushed himself up, his gaze fixed on the animal. The bear's eyes met his. There was no aggression in them, only exhaustion and something Mike couldn't quite define. Then, slowly, the bear rose to its feet. It stood unsteadily for a moment, dripping water onto the ice, before turning toward the forest. Mike stayed where he was, too drained to move. He watched as the bear staggered away, its massive frame disappearing among the trees. But just before it vanished, the bear stopped. It turned its head and looked back at him. In that gaze, Mike saw something he never expected. A silent acknowledgement, maybe even gratitude. And then it was gone. Mike sat on the ice, struggling to process what had just happened. He had saved a bear and lived to tell the tale. But he didn't know that this was only the beginning of their extraordinary connection. A week had passed since Mike rescued the bear. Everything seemed to return to normal. Frosty mornings, fishing at the same lake, cold nights by the crackling fireplace. But deep down, he couldn't forget that moment. The bear's gaze, its heavy breathing, that strange, almost human gesture when it turned to look back at him. Probably just my imagination, Mike told himself, trying to push the memory away. But one evening, something disrupted his usual routine. It was a dark night. The forest around Mike's house was utterly still, wrapped in a deep, resonant silence. Occasionally the wind rustled the trees, but that was nothing unusual. Mike was sitting by the window, holding a steaming mug of tea, when he suddenly felt uneasy. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching him. He stood up, walked to the door, and opened it, expecting to see nothing but darkness. Instead, at the edge of the forest, about 50 feet from his house, he saw a massive shadow. His heart skipped a beat. It was the bear. The same one. It stood motionless, barely distinguishable against the snowy backdrop. Even in the darkness, Mike knew it was him. Fear surged through him. What if the bear had come for revenge? But the bear didn't move. It just stood there, watching. Mike took a step back, ready to close the door, but curiosity overpowered his fear. He grabbed a flashlight and cautiously stepped outside. The bear didn't run. It stayed in place as if waiting. Mike froze a few steps away, the cold biting at his skin. A light wind rustled the trees, carrying the scent of pine and snow. "What are you doing here?" he muttered, his voice trembling. The bear slowly lowered itself onto its front paws, almost as if it wanted to show that it wasn't a threat. Mike stood there, unsure of what to do. His instincts screamed at him to retreat into the safety of his house, but something held him in place. Then he did something even stranger. He turned back to the house, grabbed a piece of bread left over from dinner, and placed it on the snow between himself and the bear. The bear didn't move at first, but after a few seconds it slowly approached. Each step it took was heavy, its massive paws crunching the snow. As it neared the bread, Mike could see its eyes clearly. There was no anger in them. The bear carefully took the bread and ate it, never breaking eye contact with Mike. Then, just as silently as it had appeared, the bear turned and walked back into the forest, leaving no sound behind, like a shadow melting into the night. Mike stood there for a long time, trying to comprehend what had just happened. "Unbelievable," he whispered. The next day, he couldn't stop thinking about it. Why had the bear come back? And why did it just stand there, staring at him? The answer came sooner than expected. A couple of days later, Mike went out to fetch firewood from the shed behind his house. As he approached the edge of the forest, he noticed tracks, huge bear tracks leading to and from his house. And next to them, on the snow, was something strange. Mike stepped closer and saw a fish, a fresh, large fish that had been left there recently. "Is this some kind of joke?" he muttered, but deep down, he already knew the answer. The bear had come back not just for food, but to leave a gift for the man who had saved its life. That encounter changed everything. Mike no longer thought of the bear as a threat. Something strange and inexplicable had formed between them, a bond that defied the laws of nature. And he felt that this was only the beginning. Mike could never have imagined that a bond with a bear could form, but it had. The days passed, and the strange encounters continued. Every time Mike ventured into the forest, he would find another gift, a fish, a rabbit, sometimes even a piece of deer meat. It wasn't a coincidence. The bear was showing its gratitude, or perhaps something deeper. As the weeks went by, Mike became used to the idea of the bear watching over him. He never saw it during the day, but the tracks in the snow and the occasional gifts left outside his house were all the proof he needed. But then, one evening, something happened that would test their strange bond. A fierce storm swept through the region. Winds howled, and the snow piled up in thick drifts, making it impossible to go outside. The temperature dropped sharply, and even the strong trees groaned under the pressure of the wind. Mike knew he had to prepare for the worst. He stocked up on food, double-checked the wood in the shed, and made sure his house was secure. But as the night wore on, the storm showed no sign of stopping. By the time midnight came, the wind was howling so loudly that Mike could hardly hear himself think. The sky was pitch black, and the snowstorm was blinding. Then, just as Mike was starting to drift off to sleep, he heard something. A loud thud against the door. Mike jumped out of bed, his heart racing. He grabbed his flashlight and carefully approached the door. He hesitated for a moment, wondering what it could be. When he opened the door, he froze. The bear was standing on his doorstep, drenched in snow, its fur matted and weighed down by the storm. It was struggling to stay upright, shivering from the cold. Mike's breath caught in his throat. "Why are you here?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. The bear looked at him, and for the first time, Mike saw fear in its eyes. Fear not for itself, but for something else. Without a second thought, Mike stepped forward, offering his warmth and shelter. He helped the bear into the house, leading it to the fireplace. The bear didn't resist. It seemed to understand, or perhaps it had learned to trust Mike completely. For the rest of the night, Mike kept the fire going, feeding the bear bits of food and watching it slowly recover from the cold. As the storm raged outside, they sat together, an unlikely pair. In the morning, the storm finally passed, but the bond between Mike and the bear had been solidified. The bear, having regained its strength, gave Mike one last look before it turned and disappeared into the woods. But this time, Mike wasn't worried. He knew the bear would return, just as he knew it would always be there to watch over him. The seasons changed, and life in the forest continued. Mike's encounters with the bear grew less frequent, but he always felt the bear's presence, somewhere out there in the trees, keeping watch. Mike had saved a bear, and in return, the bear had saved him. Their connection was a silent understanding, one that transcended words, one that would last for as long as the forest stood. And as time passed, Mike no longer saw the bear as a wild animal. He saw it as a friend, a protector. And in a way, he knew that this strange, unspoken friendship would remain forever in his heart.